Episode 27 begins with Sakura's dream again. This time she was surrounded by cherry blossom flower petals while she was staring at the radio tower, and she was all dressed up in her pink battle suit. But wait, that's not all. Sakura also sees something or someone else that was also there at the radio tower. So as she continues to stand there and stare right at it, the radio tower and someone else that was also there. But the problem is, whoever that someone else is, she couldn't see her face. Hey, let's not forget about Kero. He was also there in Sakura's dream. And of course, as Sakura continues to stare at both the radio tower and someone else that was also there, she couldn't help but wonder, who was that figure in black? What's she doing there? What is going on? And then before you know it, that's when Sakura woke up and back in the present at Sakura's upstairs room in the Avalon residence. As Sakura was sitting up in bed and in her pink pajamas, she couldn't help but look back into the dream that she had. The radio tower, and someone else dressed in black and has gold eyes. What was going on? Sakura looks at her alarm clock and it is 6 o'clock in the morning. The first thing Sakura did was to change into her school uniform, in which she did. Then she went to her bottom desk drawer and saw Kiro sleeping. And she figured, well, since he's all wore out, so she figured it's a good idea, decides to let him sleep for the day. So after that, she left her house. Well, you know what this means. Now with her rollerblades, Sakura is going to be making it to school early for a change. And she couldn't help but wonder what a beautiful day it was. Miss Mackenzie, you remember her in the last episode who had just transferred to Sakura's school recently? Well, she was the one who helped her and her friends. And looking back on that dream, while she was dressed in a pink bathsuit staring at the radio tower, she couldn't help but ask herself, what did this dream mean? What is going on? And she couldn't help but wonder in that dream also about that figure in black that was also there. And she couldn't help but think to herself, who was that figure? And what does it want from her? Once Sakura's dreams had faded away, she stopped by at the shrine. Now remember, that's the same shrine since in the last episode that Sakura caught the maze card. And that's when she met up with Miss Mackenzie. Now remember, she was the same math teacher that was in Sakura's school since in the last episode. Then Sakura remembers about what her best friend Madison said the other day. She said that Miss Mackenzie's father had run the shrine, and he still does to this day. And of course, according to Sakura, she also remembers what Lee had told her the other day also, that for some reason Miss Mackenzie couldn't be trusted. So when Miss Mackenzie appeared in front of Sakura, she says, what do you mean I couldn't be trusted? The first thing Miss Mackenzie did was to apologize for scaring Sakura, and then asked, what's wrong? Did I startle you or something? Sakura said, no. Good morning, Miss Mackenzie. And of course, Miss Mackenzie says good morning back. Then Miss Mackenzie says, gee, you're up awfully early today. Well, Sakura says, I'd like to get an early start for a change. Then Miss Mackenzie says, me too. And then she just let slip to Sakura to say that her father hasn't been feeling very well. So Miss Mackenzie says that since she's at the shrine anyway, why not help her father a little bit for a couple of days? So Sakura wants to know if Miss Mackenzie would be more than glad to have Sakura help her. And Miss Mackenzie agrees and said, sure. And so suddenly Sakura's brother's best friend shows up on his bicycle. So Julian told Miss Mackenzie, if you want to, I can help out as well. And Miss Mackenzie agrees. And so both Sakura and Julian both helped out Miss Mackenzie for most of the day anyway. So while Julian, Miss Mackenzie, and Sakura were busy sweeping up, that's when Sakura pleaded her case to Miss Mackenzie to say, I'm glad I got up early when I did to help you out. And that's when all of a sudden she started having a flashback from the previous night. Now remember, since episode 26, right after she caught the mace card and Madison had to go home. And before Lee could leave, he looked over his shoulder at Sakura and says, "If I were you, I'd be careful, because Miss Mackenzie, as he says in his case, is more than just a teacher." And that left Sakura puzzled by asking herself, what did he mean by that? Then back to the present! At the shrine, Miss Mackenzie shows up to give a bag of chestnuts, one for Julian and one for Sakura. But the first thing she did was to thank the both of them for helping her out when they did. So she passes each of the bags of chestnuts to each of them. So after Julian thanked Miss Mackenzie and then wants to know, "Are you sure it's okay?" "Of course I'm sure," Miss Mackenzie said. Then he looked at Sakura and says, "We're going to be late for school if we don't hurry up." And so Sakura agrees with Julian. And so Julian even says that even better, "I'll walk with you." And Sakura agrees. And so both Sakura and Julian head off to their schools. But before Sakura can leave, Miss Mackenzie was going to tell Sakura something. But then she decides to think nothing of it and says, "You know what? Forget it. Never mind. It's not important." So Sakura heads off, along with Julian. So meanwhile at Sakura's classroom at exactly 9:30 in the morning, the first thing she did was to say hello to her best friend, Madison. Sakura's best friend Madison just made a compliment to say, "You're not only on time, but you're early today." Then Sakura opens up her backpack and shows her best friend a bag of chestnuts that she's gotten from Miss Mackenzie earlier that day. Well, not just her, but also Julian. And she said that Miss Mackenzie has allowed Julian and herself help her earlier that morning at the shrine. Now Lee, who was behind Sakura, was asking a question. "What did you mean by you and Julian helping out Miss Mackenzie earlier that morning?" Well, Sakura hesitated before she could answer Lee's question. And then Maylin's voice says, "Hey Lee, where did you go?" And then she shows up minutes later. So after Maylin had pleaded her case to Lee to say that she grabbed her backpack and by the time that she realized that he already left and etc. And that's when she looked at Sakura with a bag full of chestnuts that she has gotten from Miss Mackenzie earlier and then asked a question, "Are those for me?" And Sakura says, "Why? Do you want one?" "Well," Maylin says, "I'll do something even better. I'll show you how to peel the chestnuts." And so that's what she did. So Sakura was watching Maylin how to peel the chestnuts so that she can learn it later. Now you can tell that both Madison and Sakura were very impressed. Then Madison says, "Gee, I wish I brought a camera with me." Then just minutes later, Miss Mackenzie walks into the classroom. And then she walks to the front desk right after she and Lee were staring at each other. So long story short, later that night at the Avalon residence, Sakura's in the dining room along with both her and Tori's father, Aiden. It was during dinner time when Aiden was looking at the note that he just got from Sakura's school, letting him know that Sakura just recently got a new math teacher, Miss Mackenzie, from the last episode, of course. So not only that Sakura told her father that that's indeed correct, and then she said that even better, the old math teacher will be gone for a month. And then she wanted to know from her father if he ever met Miss Mackenzie. Well, Aiden explains that he did remember her and that her father runs the shrine. Then by surprise, Aiden just let slip to Sakura to say that her older brother Tori once knew Miss Mackenzie 4 years ago when he was in junior high school at the time. It was at the same time that both her and Tori's late mother died. Then Aiden also explains that Miss Mackenzie has a teaching job overseas. So when she told Tori that she had to leave, she didn't even tell him why. This of course says, "Well, this is weird because she just let slip in front of her father to say that her brother was seen recently with Miss Mackenzie. But they act like as if they don't remember at all about what had happened. It's like that they don't know each other," Sakura explains. Now, Aiden, who agrees with Sakura, says, "You know something? You're right. That is." Meanwhile, at the shrine, Miss Mackenzie, who is Sakura's new teacher, is standing in front of the cherry blossom tree. And then at the same time, she was staring at the moonlight in the sky. So while Miss Mackenzie was looking at the moonlight in the sky, what she doesn't realize is that for some unknown reason, a force of some kind is about to possess that tree behind her, and is about to possess it. Well, the time is now 9:55 p.m., just almost 10 o'clock at night. Back with Sakura, just moments ago, she just left her residence and along with Kero. And the reason why they're heading to the shrine is because Kero is sensing a you know what. So Sakura was asking him if he was sure of it. And of course, Kero has told her that he is indeed sure. Then Kero also says that the moment that he sensed the you know what, it just woke him up all of a sudden. So now both he and Sakura must hurry to the shrine. So finally they arrived at the shrine just as they planned. Then Sakura explains by the time she arrived at the shrine that this is the same shrine that just an episode ago that she caught the maze. Then Sakura explains that she didn't do it alone, she did it with Miss Mackenzie's help. You mean that math teacher? Carol asked. Why, yes, Sakura said, but now here comes a bigger problem. Which card is it? Well, that's when she and Carol were realizing that they weren't alone, because here comes Lee with his raisin board that were right behind him. And then Lee says that whatever this is, you could say it has immense powers, Lee explains. So after Sakura and Kiro were told by Lee that he was sure of it, so Kiro has his turn to ask a question. What are you doing here? Well, as you can probably tell, we got everything under control. So where's Maylin? Sakura asked. Well, unfortunately she's at home, Lee says. She has to finish her book report. Aha, Kiro says. So the little girl has a book report to do, right? Stop calling her that, Sakura says. You know how upset Melee is when you say that. So Sakura also said that since Maylin's new to the school, it'll take her a while to catch up. So they was asking Sakura a question. Where did Madison go? She's always here to videotape captures. I'm afraid it's a little late for her to show up now, Sakura said. So, in other words, in Sakura's case, there was no way for her to contact her best friend. So it's just Lee, Sakura, and Kiro. So he says, well, what are we waiting for? We got a card to catch. And of course, he's not kidding. So, you know what this means. It's mission time. So, long story short, while Lee's standing in front of the tree, the cherry blossom tree that is, he does what he knows best. He uses his lazing board. So Carol told Lee, I don't get it. The cart's around here somewhere, but where is it? Well, it couldn't have gone far, Lee said. I know it's here. Now Sakura agrees with Lee and Carol, but then she pleaded her case to say that they've been waiting for an hour and nothing happened. I agree, Carol says, but then he pleads his case to say a moment ago that he had a feeling that the car must be around, but now he doesn't feel it anymore. Now Carol wants to know if there's a vending machine somewhere around because he says in his case he's getting thirsty and so is Sakura. So she says, while you're heading there, take my change purse with you. And so Carol agrees and then he heads off. So he went off to the vending machines while Sakura and Lee stayed behind. So back with Lee and Sakura now up in the tree, Sakura wants to know from Lee if somehow for some unknown reason the car must have left the park. Then Lee says, nah, no way, not a chance. Then Lee had a hunch that maybe it's just hiding away since it knew that we were coming, he suggested. Then Sakura said that even if we captured this card, whatever it may be, it'll be the second that we found, right here in this shrine. Now Lee, who agrees with Sakura, he says, you're right. That's because that's the same place that we captured the maze card before. And of course, Sakura agrees with Lee. But she says that they didn't do it alone because they knew that Miss Mackenzie was there to help them. So Lee says, yes, I agree. She did help us out. But for some reason, I still don't trust her. Haven't you sensed anything from her yet? He asked. Then Lee says, it's like I explained to you before. We both had to be on guard no matter what. But for what reason? Sakura asked. Why? I don't see there's any reason why you shouldn't trust her at all. Then Sakura says, in my opinion, I think I like her very much. I think she's trying to help us both out, she says. Well, Lee jumps down off the tree first and is stating that he's giving up. But Sakura runs to catch up with him after she too jumps off the tree. And she says, Hey Lee, wait for me. But then suddenly, before Sakura could do anything about it, the tree starts to glow. And then for some unknown reason, there's a strange hole in the middle of the tree. And then, back with Kero, when he saw what was going on, he realized that in shock, something is pulling Sakura inside of the tree. And of course, as for Lee, he tried to save her, but he couldn't do a thing about it. And neither did Kero when he came back, and that's when Lee told him the bad news that something just swallowed up Sakura inside the tree. And that's when Kero should have known. It was definitely a you know what. The return card, that is. We'll get back to that later. But right now, back with Sakura, the moment she woke up on the ground, that's when she realized right then that she had just went back 4 years into the past. Now, since 26 episodes ago, we have mentioned that just 4 years prior, Sakura was only 6 years old when both her and Tori's mother died. And it was at the same time, as Aiden mentioned, in the dining room of the Avalon residence just before Sakura left, that's when Tori met up with Miss Mackenzie when he at the time was in junior high school. So back with Sakura, who had just now woken up 4 years ago into the past, and that's when she realizes what was going on. She got pulled into the exact same tree as she was in the future. But now, for some unknown reason, the hole that she was pulled into disappeared. And now Sakura remembers that this is the exact same cherry blossom tree. Now she could tell because there were fallen petals that were surrounding her. But then she hears someone coming and she thought it was Lee. But then she said, wait a minute, that's not Lee. She knows she has to find a place to hide. And so to do so, she changed her cloud key into a staff and using the jump card, she jumps into the tree. And by the time that the figure steps closer and closer, that's when she realizes it's her older brother, Tori. But he's in his junior high school uniform. So back with Tori, who was stepping closer and closer to the tree, and with Sakura watching him. And she thinks to herself, as he sees her, that she's going to be in serious trouble. But then she's thought, wait a minute, something is different. Because she now realizes that her older brother was wearing a junior high school uniform from 4 years ago. So back with Tori of the past, of course, he went to the trunk of the tree and felt something really weird. Now back with Sakura, she's still watching from inside of the tree. When back with Tori of the past, of course, that's when he realizes that he wasn't alone because Miss Mackenzie was right behind him. And the first thing she did was to say hello to him. Now remember, at the Avalon Residence's dining room, Aiden did mention that Tori did have a math teacher, Miss Mackenzie, once upon a time. That was before she went to her teaching job overseas. So anyway, Tori started having a conversation with Miss Mackenzie. And Miss Mackenzie says, you're one of my students, am I correct? And Tori says, it is indeed correct. And still watching above in the tree was Sakura. So back with Miss Mackenzie talking to Tori, and she wanted to know if he had sensed something really weird in that tree moments ago. And Tori said that he did. Then Miss Mackenzie says it is extremely difficult for you to see something that others do not. And then you can sense things. Am I wrong? That's a question to Tori in the past, of course. So by omission, by confession, that's when Tori said that first of all, no, she's not wrong. And second of all, he's getting the hang of it. Sort of. So then Miss Mackenzie asked, you have a sister named Sakura, right? That's right, Tori said. I do. Oh, by the way, twist! It was at the time when Sakura was only 6 years old. And that's when Tori met Miss Mackenzie. So, still up in the tree, Sakura couldn't help but wonder what was going on here. But then Sakura remembers and she says, "Oh, I got it. Now I remember. The return card must have sent me 4 years into the past." So then, back with Tori and Miss Mackenzie of the past, of course, that's when Miss Mackenzie told Tori that she must be off. But then Miss Mackenzie says, "Don't worry, I'll come back the very next day." "Okay," Tori said, and then she heads off. So back to the present! 4 years into the future, of course, with Lee and Kero. That's when Kero explained to Leah what the return card did. It returned someone back into the past, 4 years to be exact, and that's exactly what happened with Sakura. But Kero says, here's the catch. It takes someone with magical powers to do this. So that's exactly what is going on. Lee was shocked. He just couldn't believe what he heard. And then he wanted to know why up until that very minute that it hasn't been used. And why did it appear? And Carol says, well, this tree is part of the shrine, right? That's what he was asking Lee. Then Carol says, well, in this case, this tree that you're standing in front of is holding a lot of power. That's why the return card chose this tree in the first place. Then Carol says, now here comes a bigger problem. Since that's the case, it can only take one person at a time back into the past. So what the return card did is that it waited for one person to get in front of the tree, and that person was Sakura. Oh, one more thing, Carol says. There's a full moon out there. And of course he isn't kidding. So unless Lee and Carol comes up with a plan and quick, that means Sakura will be stuck in the past. So speaking of which, back to the past, 4 years ago, of course. And speaking of Tori of the past, of course, he meets up with Miss Mackenzie again the very next day, just the way he planned. The first thing he did was to say good morning to her, and she said good morning back. So, being curious, Tori of the past, of course, wanted to know from Miss Mackenzie how she knew about his sister Sakura. So, in omission by confession, Miss Mackenzie says, I can sense it just like you did. Then Miss Mackenzie also confessed that just like what Tori has, she has a special kind of power. What kind? Tori of the past asked. Well, Miss Mackenzie says, I can't explain it to you now because, first of all, it's very complicated. And second of all that she knows is that both she and Tori are connected to someone really, really special. So Tori says, really? Who is it? Still up in the tree, Sakura couldn't help but ask herself, it's not me that they're speaking of, are they? So Miss Mackenzie had a second thought by telling Tori who it was. So she says, I can't tell you right now, but someday you'll understand it. So Tori, who was really confused at that time, begs Miss Mackenzie to tell him who that special someone is. But Miss Mackenzie not only refused, but she shakes her head. So Miss Mackenzie says, I really can't explain this to you right now. And so before leaving, that's when Tori and Miss Mackenzie shook hands. So still up in a tree, Sakura has a surprised notion that they did know each other 4 years ago. They being Tori and Miss Mackenzie, that is. So back to the present, 4 years later in the future with Lee and Kero. So Lee wants to know what are we going to do about it. So he says unless we rescue Sakura, unfortunately, the past will become the present and she'll be stuck there forever, whichever the case may be. So, in other words, in Kiro's case, then this could mean a serious problem. So Lee wants to know, is there something we can do to rescue her? Well, Kiro says it's not exactly impossible, but we're going to give it a try. So, yep, back to the past. 4 years ago was the day of the festival, where Tori again meets up with Miss Mackenzie. So after Miss Mackenzie and Tori were having a good time at the festival, that's when Miss Mackenzie made a confession with Tori that she's going to be leaving soon. It was at the time that, according to Aiden in the dining room of the Avalon residence, he told Sakura it was at that time that Miss Mackenzie has a teaching job overseas in England. So anyway, back with Tori and Miss Mackenzie having a talk with each other, that's when she confessed to Tori that she'll be leaving in the week. Now, Sakura, who stood up in the tree, couldn't hear what they said because she was too far away. So back with Miss Mackenzie, she told Tori to do a favor for her. She said, "Promise me one thing. Don't tell Sakura about our conversation. And whatever you do, don't ever tell her that we knew each other, all right?" So Tori agrees. So that explains why, up to 4 years later, why they never knew each other and why they never remembered until episode 26, of course, that they met up again 4 years later. And that's why she to this day became Sakura's substitute teacher, just like she was now. So speaking of Sakura, who stood up in the tree after they overheard a conversation between her older brother and Miss Mackenzie from 4 years ago, the tree, for some unknown reason, started to glow again, just like it did before. And just like that, just like what Sakura did when she was transported back into the past, she went back to the present 4 years later with Lee and Kero. And so, yep, you've heard right. Sakura is back in the future. So good news for Kiro. He was glad to see Sakura back. He says, "I'm so glad you're safe." Now that Kiro and Sakura are together again, and along with Lee, let's not forget about him. So Sakura wanted to know, how did she get out of this tree? Well, Kiro said when he just let slip in front of Sakura to say that, "I'm glad that you have Lee to come through for you," when he did. Then suddenly, just like what it did before, twice, the tree started to glow for the third time. But this time, Sakura was ready. Now she's not going to go through that again, just like she did the first time when she went back 4 years to the past. So there's only one thing left for her to do: capture the return card, in which she did. So guess what? Oh, and in a surprise twist, it was Lee who used the time card to get Sakura out of the tree, and he did so, and just in time too. Oh, and by the way, the return card makes it his third card on the list. But unfortunately for Lee, since he used the time card, it just made him wore out. So when Sakura saw Lee collapsed after he said it's good for you to be back, that's when she ran over to him to see if he was all right. So she says, "Lee, oh my goodness, are you okay?" "Don't worry, he's fine." So back with Lee and Sakura, now that Lee's resting against a tree, that's when Kiro gave Sakura the good news and bad news. Well, first the bad news. He said that the return card just took her 4 years back into the past. But the good news is that the only way to seal the return is if Lee used the time card, in which he did. So after Sakura had thanked Lee for saving her when he did, and of course, that's when Kira looks up the moon up into the sky and whispers the name Yue. But who is Yue? But unfortunately, it'll come to Kiro a little later, and that's when he, Sakura, and Lee should have realized that they weren't alone, because watching them was Miss Mackenzie. So, anyway, now that Sakura has 26 cards on the list and Lee has only three, only time will tell. But right now, there's still a lot of cards to catch. So that ends episode 27.